I'm Jake, 19, and if you asked anyone in my family to describe me, I guarantee they'd start with, well, he's not like Emily. My older sister Emily was always the golden child, class valedictorian, prom queen, early admission to an Ivy League school, and now engaged to the walking Rolex that is Brendan. Meanwhile, I was the kid who liked fixing up old electronics, stayed in the background, and got told I lacked ambition every other Tuesday. Our mom, a fiercely controlling woman who treated Emily like a prized investment and me like a draft she never bothered editing, never even tried to hide the favoritism. She's going places, she'd sigh dreamily while watching Emily practice wedding poses in the living room. And you, Jake? Well, maybe you'll find your niche someday. Translation: don't embarrass us. Growing up in that house was like being an extra in someone else's spotlight. I didn't complain, though. I focused on school, worked part-time jobs, saved what I could, and quietly looked forward to leaving. My one lifeline was the college fund, a modest savings account my grandfather had started for me before he passed away. I nurtured that account like it was sacred. I researched scholarships, considered cheaper universities, and even thought about community college just to make it stretch further. My mom always said it was untouchable. Grandpa's dying wish had been that each grandkid had a shot at higher education, no strings attached. Then came the engagement. The announcement was, of course, a full-blown gala. Emily wore a pearl-white dress that looked like it required its own zip code, and Brendan gave a speech so rehearsed it might have been written by a PR team. Everyone clapped like they were in a studio audience. I just sipped my soda and smiled. I knew what was coming. I just didn't expect it to come so fast. The next weekend, Mom called a family meeting, which basically meant me, her, and Emily sitting at the dining table while she talked and Emily pretended to listen. The gist of it? They needed money. A lot of it. Apparently, Brendan's family had unexpected issues with their side of the budget. A venue cancellation, an overbooked florist, something about monogrammed ice sculptures, it all sounded absurd. They were $20,000 short. It's just a bump, Mom said, trying to sound casual while stirring her tea. And you're not even using your college fund yet. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? Emily leaned in, eyes wide with that fake sympathy she used whenever she was about to say something truly awful. Jake, think about it. This wedding is important for all of us. It's family. You'll still go to college, just maybe community first? Maybe later? It's not like you're in a rush. My jaw clenched, but I stayed quiet. I turned to Mom. She didn't look ashamed. She looked expectant. Like this was the part where I'd agree, prove I was the good son, the team player, the silent background character. Then she said it. The line that would stick with me forever. It's not like you'll ever amount to anything. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember grabbing my coat or walking to my car. I just remember the way Emily laughed like it was some joke, like I should have found it funny too. I didn't talk to them for 2 weeks. During that time, I thought about everything, my future, my self-worth, how many times I'd swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. But more than anything, I thought about Grandpa, about how he'd shown up to every school science fair, even when I didn't place, about the way he used to ruffle my hair and say, "You've got more going on up there than the rest of them combined." They'll see. I could still hear his voice when I stared at the transfer screen on my bank's app. So I transferred every last dollar, every cent of my college fund. I waited for the email confirmation, then smiled. But I didn't transfer it to Emily or to my mom. I sent it to someone else entirely. I didn't RSVP to the wedding. I didn't even return their texts, and they were plenty. First polite, then irritated, then openly furious. Mom tried to call me 3 times the night before the ceremony. I let it ring out. Emily left a voicemail that started with "seriously" and ended with "this is so typical of you." I didn't bother replying, but I did show up. The church was packed. Satin ribbons everywhere. Brendan stood at the altar looking like he'd walked out of a catalog. Emily wore a dress so blinding it shimmered under the chandeliers like it was photoshopped in real life. I didn't sneak in quietly. I made sure they saw me. I walked straight down the aisle, ignoring the gasps and whispers. In my hand was a single envelope. Emily's smile faltered the moment she saw me. Mom, sitting front row, went pale. Brendan glanced at me, then at Emily, like he'd just been handed a live grenade and wasn't sure which end would explode first. I stopped 5 feet from them. The envelope in my hand held something they'd never expect, and something that could burn the entire facade to the ground. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was like the entire church, the rows of overly perfumed guests, the pastel-draped bridesmaids, the fidgeting flower girl who just wanted to go home, was frozen in place, waiting for the next line in a badly written play. I didn't speak. I just looked at my mother. She stood slowly, clutching her purse like it was a shield. "Jake," she said, tight-lipped, the kind of tone she used when she wanted to sound calm but was ready to explode. "We talked about this. You weren't even invited." I turned to Emily. She raised her eyebrows like I was some inconvenience that showed up to ruin her perfect photos. "If this is about the money," she said, not even trying to whisper, "it's already been spent." "Too late." I nodded once. "I know." I lifted the envelope slightly, just enough for them to see the weight of it. It wasn't thick, but it didn't need to be. It was what it represented that mattered. Then I walked over, not to Emily, not to Mom, not to the priest or the wedding planner frantically mouthing "Who is he?" from the corner, but to Brendan. His posture stiffened. I handed him the envelope. "You'll want to read that," I said. Then, just loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, I added, "Before you say, I do." He stared at me for a second too long, then carefully opened it. There were 3 sheets of paper inside. The first was a printed screenshot of an email chain. The second was a certified bank transaction. And the third, well, the third was the reason Emily's jaw tightened so sharply she might have cracked a molar. Brendan's expression shifted as he read. He didn't say anything at first. He just kept flipping pages, slower each time. Then he looked up, blinked like he'd come out of a trance, and asked one quiet, fatal question. "Who is Marcus?" That was the moment it all cracked. Emily blinked. "What?" I didn't flinch. "You heard him." "I don't know what you're—" "He does," I interrupted, nodding at Brendan. "He knows now." The church erupted. Not all at once, not an explosion, but a cascade. First, a gasp from the front row. Then Brendan's mother stood, whispering furiously to her husband. A bridesmaid dropped her bouquet. Someone in the back coughed, very awkwardly. Emily, for once in her life, didn't have a script to read from. Her eyes darted between me and Brendan, and she started to say something, a lie, probably, but Brendan cut her off. "That's who you've been texting at 2 a.m.? While telling me it was your wedding planner." Emily's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It wasn't serious. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. She said the same thing to me once. Different context, different sting, but same pattern. Deny, minimize, blame. Brendan didn't explode. He didn't yell or throw the envelope. That would have made it easier for her. Instead, he handed it to his best man like it was radioactive and stepped back from the altar. "No," he said simply, and turned to walk down the aisle. Emily went after him, grabbing the edge of her $1,000 dress with one hand and reaching for him with the other. "Wait, Brendan, please. I can explain. Jake's lying. He's jealous." That was when I laughed. Quietly. Not cruelly, more like someone watching a magician fumble their final trick and drop the cards all over the stage. Brendan didn't turn back. And then my mom. Oh, my mom. She stood like she'd just been slapped in front of royalty, eyes flicking between me, the guests, and the unraveling chaos. Her voice trembled. "How could you do this to your sister?" I faced her fully. "You did this. When you decided I didn't matter. When you made me believe I'd never amount to anything. I just handed Emily the spotlight she always wanted. I just made sure everyone saw her clearly." Her expression darkened. "You ruined everything." I nodded again. "No, she did. I just stopped covering for her." That was the last thing I said before turning around and walking out. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Outside, the sun was bright. Not in a poetic, symbolic way, just real. I took a breath. It was the first one in years that didn't taste like silence. And just when I reached my car, my phone vibrated. 6 missed calls from Emily. 2 from Mom. 1 new voicemail. Then another. I turned off the phone, tossed it into the passenger seat, and started the engine. I had already submitted my application to a college across the country a few days earlier. I'd used the money from my fund, not to pay for their wedding, but to pay a retainer for a private investigator. Marcus had just been the start. I had the full thread, every message, every secret. Enough to stop the wedding, and enough to make Brendan rethink who he was about to marry. And that wasn't even the best part. The drive home was quiet. Not just in sound, but in weight. That heavy pressure I'd always felt after family events, the knot in my stomach, the voice whispering "you're not enough," it wasn't there anymore. It was like walking out of a burning building and realizing, for the first time, that the fire had always been around you, not in you. By the time I reached my apartment, I had 14 missed calls. 10 from Emily, 4 from my mom. There were a few texts too, most of them frantic, some angry. a few with the desperate tone of someone realizing the dominoes are already midfall. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they'd say. But I did check the email confirmation again. Enrollment complete. Fall semester. I stared at those words for a while. I hadn't planned to send in the paperwork that night. I'd been hesitant, honestly, second-guessing myself, wondering if I was ready, if I was smart enough, if I was just fooling myself into thinking I could be more than the kid who lived in Emily's shadow. But that night, after Mom said those words, "It's not like you'll ever amount to anything," I knew I had to prove something. Not to them. To me. That night, I finally slept. The next morning, my phone buzzed again, but it wasn't Emily or Mom this time. It was Brendan. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a good 2 minutes before responding. "Talk or yell?" He replied almost instantly. "Talk. Please." We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over neutral ground. He looked tired, like someone who had just stepped off a roller coaster he didn't want to ride. His hair was messier than I'd ever seen it, and his suit jacket had been swapped out for a hoodie. It was the first time I'd seen him look human. "I didn't believe it at first," he said, once we sat down. "I thought maybe you were trying to sabotage her." But then I confronted Marcus. I raised an eyebrow. "You found him?" He nodded. "It wasn't hard. Your papers had screenshots with timestamps. I called the number. He thought I was you. Started ranting about how she ghosted him last week, promised to make it work after the wedding, and then blocked him when he asked if she was really going through with it." I sipped my coffee. "Sounds about right." He paused. "She lied to me. Repeatedly. Told me you were unstable. That you were angry because she got everything, and you couldn't stand her happiness." "She wasn't wrong about that part," I admitted. "I was angry, but not about her happiness. I was angry that the one thing I had, my future, was disposable to her. And to my mom." He looked at me for a long moment. "She's always been like that, hasn't she?" I nodded slowly. "She just had enough people covering for her that she never had to change." Brendan leaned back in his seat, eyes distant. "I can't believe I almost married her." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He pulled something out of his coat pocket, a check. "I know it won't fix everything," he said, "but I want you to have this. For your college. Or whatever you want. You kept me from making the biggest mistake of my life. That's worth more than a thank you." I stared at the check. 25,000. More than what I'd even saved. I didn't touch it right away. "I didn't do this for you," I said quietly. He smiled. "I know. That's why it meant something." I took the check. By the time I got home, Emily had called 5 more times. Her last voicemail was just her crying. Not words. Just sobbing. The kind of ugly, hiccuping cry that didn't sound like her at all. I listened to it once, deleted it, and blocked her number. Then I did the same with Mom's. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. I almost tossed it, thinking it was some passive-aggressive guilt trip from Mom. But the handwriting didn't match. And inside wasn't a letter, it was a photograph. An old one. Of me and Grandpa, standing in front of his garage, both of us grinning with grease-covered hands from working on a broken lawnmower. On the back was a note. "You always saw things for what they were. Don't forget who you are. Love, G." I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I looked up, around my small apartment, the stack of old tech I'd been meaning to fix, the acceptance letter tacked onto the fridge. Someone had sent that on purpose. Someone who knew what it would mean. But I hadn't told anyone I was going to college again. Not even Brendan. And that's when I started to wonder, was someone else watching this whole thing unfold? Was someone still pulling strings, just in the background? That's when I found the second envelope, tucked under my door, sealed with wax. And that is when everything really started to change. The wax seal was deep red, almost burgundy, and pressed with a crest I didn't recognize, just an ornate G inside a circle, like something out of an old novel. For a second, I thought maybe it was a prank. Maybe Brendan had gotten creative. But something about the envelope felt old, intentional. Like whoever sent it had thought about this moment for a long time. I took it inside, sat down at my small kitchen table, and opened it with the kind of care usually reserved for ancient documents or defusing bombs. Inside was a single letter, written in familiar handwriting. Neat, slightly slanted, faded in a way that made my chest tighten before I even read a word. "Jake, if you're reading this, it means the worst parts of the family finally reached you, like I always feared they would. I hoped, truly hoped, that somehow you'd be spared the ugly parts, the manipulation, the favoritism. The feeling like you were never enough. But I know you. And I know you probably didn't just sit back and take it. If you're anything like I remember, you handled it your way. Quietly, precisely, and probably with a screwdriver in one hand. I couldn't help but smile. My eyes were already burning, but I kept reading. I left something for you. Not just the college fund. That was the easy part. I left you the rest of what I had, too. The house. The tools. The account they don't know about. Your mom didn't want me to. She said you wouldn't appreciate it. That Emily needed it more. But I saw how she treated you even when you were a kid. I saw the way she twisted you into someone quiet, someone small. And I made a decision. So I put it all in a trust. Not just in your name, but with conditions only you could fulfill. And if you're holding this letter, it means those conditions were met. You stood up for yourself. You protected something sacred. You didn't let them win. Now go live the life they said you couldn't. Love always, Grandpa. Below that was a set of instructions. A key code. A bank name. A list of assets. My hands were trembling as I flipped through the last page. There it was, a portfolio summary. Investments, savings, bonds. He had quietly grown the money over the years. And it wasn't just enough for tuition anymore. It was enough to pay for an entire degree, housing, living expenses, and still have a cushion left over for a future. There was also a deed. For his house. He'd left it all to me. Every last thing they assumed would fall into Emily's hands. Every tool I used to work on old radios as a kid. Every wooden shelf lined with coffee cans full of screws sorted by size. Every corner that smelled like oil, sawdust, and something warm I hadn't felt since the last time I hugged him. I sat at that table for hours. It wasn't the money that made me cry. It was the fact that someone, once, saw me, believed in me, had faith in the person I hadn't even become yet. And he'd fought quietly, even after death, to make sure I had a chance. Later that week, I drove out to his house. The same small place on the edge of town that had always felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived with my mother. The key code worked. The locks hadn't changed. It looked exactly like I remembered. A little older, a little dustier, but untouched. Safe. There were photos still on the mantel, one of me and him fishing, one of him and Grandma before she passed. And in the corner of the garage was the old bench I used to sit on while he worked, my legs swinging too short to reach the ground. I stayed the night there. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I pulled the faded quilt from the linen closet, made a cup of tea the way he used to, 2 sugars, no milk, and sat in his chair, watching the moonlight fall across the living room floor. The next morning, I started packing. Not to leave, to move in. I canceled the lease on my apartment. I called the college and confirmed enrollment. I even signed up for summer orientation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my life had a path that belonged to me. Of course, my silence didn't last long. The next week, Mom showed up. She didn't call, didn't text, just knocked on the door like it was still her father's house, like she hadn't gone behind my back to try to drain my future for flower arrangements and champagne fountains. When I opened the door, she looked shocked. Not angry, not smug, just shocked. "I thought you were staying in that dump apartment," she said, squinting at the living room like she didn't recognize it. I stayed in the doorway. "This is my home now." Her jaw tightened. "Your grandfather wouldn't want." "He did," I interrupted. "He left me everything. You know that now, don't you?" Her face darkened. "We had an agreement. He said he'd set something aside for Emily too." "No," I said, calmly. "He promised to take care of me, because he knew no one else would." There was a pause. Then her voice dropped into that old, bitter tone she always used when she couldn't win outright. "You really think this makes you special? That this means something?" I didn't blink. "It does to me. And that's enough." She stared at me for a moment, as if trying to find the right button to push. But something had changed in me. The buttons weren't there anymore. Eventually, she turned to leave. No goodbye. No threat. Just a stiff, furious walk back to her car like she couldn't stand the sight of a world where I had something she didn't control. Emily never came by. She sent one last text, an apology of sorts. It said, "I was under pressure. I didn't mean it like that. Can we please talk?" I left it on read. A month later, I started college. Walked into my first class wearing a beat-up hoodie, carrying a refurbished laptop I'd rebuilt myself, and sat in the front row. The professor handed out a syllabus. I took notes. I listened. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the kid in the background. I felt like someone with a future. Someone who didn't need permission to exist. I fixed up Grandpa's house over the next year. Nothing dramatic, just cleaning, repairing, painting. I kept everything that mattered exactly where it was. The house didn't need to be changed. It just needed someone to love it again. And as for Brendan, he ended up writing me a letter too. Handwritten. Thanked me again. Said he started therapy. He'd been with Emily for years and said the longer he looked back, the more cracks he saw in the foundation. I believed him. He also said he might pursue law school after all, now that he wasn't funding someone else's illusion of a perfect life. The check he gave me? I didn't cash it. I framed it. A reminder. Not of revenge. Of freedom. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't ruining their life. It's reclaiming your own. And I did. Every single inch of it.